There, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is Thursday, the 24th of, I don't even know what month, March 2020. I was going to say 2024, it's 2022. I always have trouble keeping track of which year it is. I don't know why, but usually not in the other direction. But whatever. The thing that I wanted to talk about today is actually something that I hope is something that never really comes into play, never really matters. But it's something that I worry a little bit about, and I worry about it partially from knowing a bit of history, and partially from knowing a bit of physics, and partially from just knowing a little bit of human psychology. And I'm not an expert by any means in that or the history, but the thing that, I dabble, let's just say. The thing that really strikes me is, I'm going to kind of set this up and then it'll be obvious. Of course, if you looked at the title, you probably know what I'm getting to. I've listened to hardcore history for quite some time. And if you've not listened to it, it is a fantastic podcast. I like the way that it's done. And I mean, these things that I make are like an hour long. Now, granted, it's me rambling for the most part and not super well researched. I'm not really necessarily telling a story. I'm just kind of going off on tangents with a little bit of a theme, kind of polarizing things. But if you like something that's kind of long form like that, hardcore history has things where it'll be like World War II covered in 5 4-hour episodes. Or I'm just pulling those numbers out of my ass, but it's something like that. And they're actually really good. I mean, there is some repetition. There are some common themes that keep coming up again and again. But overall, really interesting. And I'm not even that much of a history buff. History is one of those things, actually. When I was in school, especially, undergrad less so, but especially like high school and middle school and even more grade school, I just didn't care that much about history. I always liked science and math, especially math after we got past just the rote memorization kind of stuff. Like when we were doing, multiplication tables, I hated it. I was not a fan of that. But when I got to algebra, it just like clicked with me, and from there to calculus and advanced algebra, which is very different than you might think if you've just had algebra, but looking at like fields and groups and rings and all of these kinds of things. And all of that stuff just really, really resonated with me. And I've always liked that. History, I didn't develop that much of an appreciation for until I was a little bit older. I mean, it's maybe like my, I can't stand whiskey or any of these kinds of alcohols, but I think in the same way that some people develop a taste for those things, I've developed a taste for history. And it was something that, when you're a kid, especially, and I do think, honestly, a lot of these things come down to the teachers. I had some, to be fair, very good history teachers in high school and junior high and even grade school. Although grade school, a little bit of junior high, it was more like one teacher covering everything. And then as you get to high school, it was very nice because all of a sudden, even if you get one crappy teacher out of the semester, you still have a bunch of other ones. And, each one is covering kind of a subject, which breaks up the day in a way. And then when I got to undergrad, it was just fucking amazing. For me, it was every semester I would take, I don't know, like 5-ish classes, and they would just run the gamut from, some semesters I might have like 2 math classes, but for the most part I'd get like one, hardish science, like a physics or something, one softish science, like a microbiology or something. I would get a little bit of math. I'd get women's studies, or something, Native American religious traditions, or something that was kind of out there a little bit relative to the rest of the stuff. And I would just get this nice mixture, like philosophy of science and linguistics and all of these different things. And French. I took French for um, a while in undergrad. That was another thing. I don't know why. I started it in middle school, went through high school, did it in undergrad, and similarly, I just didn't have that much of a taste for it. I did it and continued on it, and I don't know why I picked it, other than like I could. My family, dad's side of the family is Spanish. My dad only spoke Spanish up until the point where he was like 6 or so, when he started going to kindergarten, and it was really hard for him to learn English to such an extent, in fact, that my name, Scott, intentionally picked to be as not Spanish as possible, kind of to mask that, because he had some trouble and a lot of prejudice, and I mean against him. It was kind of, and then he also like just struggled with the language, so for that reason, didn't really teach, and in fact, deliberately avoided speaking Spanish around my sister and I when we were younger, which is unfortunate. She has actually still become fluent. I'm okay. I can get by, but definitely struggle. Anyway, for some reason, didn't do that. That is freaky. Okay, so weird bangy noise outside. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Freaked me out. I will definitely try to come back and edit that. I certainly hope so. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. Uh, didn't learn Spanish as a kid. Started French in middle school. Picked it kind of maybe deliberately, as I'm not really a rebellious person, but maybe it was a slight rebellion against that, or maybe it was something else. I don't know. But whatever it was, I did that. And all the way through undergrad, when I completed it, I was like, okay. I didn't really like, put myself into it that much. I didn't try that hard. And my French definitely suffered for it. Somehow later in graduate school, I got motivated and I took French, like a conversational French class, and really pushed on it. I took Spanish also in graduate school and also really pushed on that. It was amazing to me. In grad school, the first semester of like Spanish 101, I was so far beyond, obviously just from osmosis and being present in the class, I picked up a little bit from French. But when I tried in Spanish and I actually studied vocabulary and grammar and conjugations and all this kind of stuff, really performed pretty well. And I think that motivated me later on when I went to French again to work on it. Although when I took Spanish in undergrad or in grad school, just destroyed whatever little French I had for a while. Now I can get by a little bit in both and sort of separate them. Although I do have a thing where if I'm out of a vocabulary word, my brain seems to have English and then not English. And I'll be struggling to come up with a word when I'm speaking French. And if I can't do it, I have learned that the right thing to do generally is just like English with a French accent, because 99% of the time when you don't know the word, it's just it's just exactly that. Sometimes not, but often. And what happens instead, though, is I'll randomly pull a Spanish word, or sometimes a Chinese word. I've only taken I think maybe I just took one semester of Chinese, but whatever it was, I have a little bit of vocab, maybe a few hundred characters, maybe a little bit more, but not anywhere near enough. I have enough to just like to say goodbye is an exaggeration. I can say hello, say goodbye, ask how you're doing. That sort of first layer of the onion of conversation, I can get by with that, and then once you get past that, I'm like, I haven't got the slightest fucking clue. But I do have enough there that sometimes if I can't come up with the word in French, my brain randomly grasps at the Chinese word because maybe I know that for some reason. Anyway, rolling back. I was talking to a barista today, and she is pre-med, undergrad, I think second year, and she was talking about organic chemistry and a bunch of other classes. It's about the time where she's signing up for courses for next semester, and was just asking me about how the next semester of OChem was and a few other things like that. And we were just talking, and it really made me just reminisce a bit about I've liked a lot of different stages of my educational career, but I think undergrad was my favorite, and not socially by any means. I was not doing that well. I wasn't doing badly. I was just kind of asocial for the most part. I just did not have much social contact at all until one semester. I've had this happen a few times in my life, but somebody who was really friendly in one of these sort of social hubs, guy who knows a bunch of other people, who organizes stuff, somehow just kind of latched onto me a little bit and took me into these social events. So nothing too exciting, but going to study at the time in Perkins, which is now Chompies and has been probably for like over a decade. I don't even know. But I have a kind of fond memory of that, and some other just little small things. I don't even remember what, like going on a hike or something. And they just sort of stuck with me. But for the most part, until graduate school, just did not really engage that much socially. And even in graduate school, it was really hit or miss until pretty late into my PhD. And I really started getting a little bit more traction there, kind of my last year of my PhD and my sort of postdoc-ish junior scientist position that came afterwards. And again there, I think what really drove that, part of it is certainly that I worked on it for a long time. I had, I've used as a crutch tonight so many times. I don't know. I don't know why that's coming up. I think normally I don't do that, but it's annoying me. And anyway, though, I'd worked on social anxiety for a while. Takes some time to get past that. I still to this day am not really comfortable in a lot of social situations. And frankly, the pandemic has probably exacerbated that a little bit because it's been so easy not to go into spaces and not to engage with people. And the fact that also like now people are just completely like throwing caution to the wind. They seem to have completely given up and decided that the pandemic is over, which is fantastic given that BA2 is kind of ramping up right now, although we don't have good surveillance anymore. Our testing is sort of ramping down. So, and the CDC did this map recoloring thing so that, and redefinition of all of that, away from community transmission to hospital utilization, essentially. Which means that now, rather than leading, the indicators will lag by a few weeks, a couple weeks at least. So that's all really fantastic. And we just had a really great milestone. A million Americans died from this. We were already over a million excess deaths from the beginning of the pandemic a few months ago, I think, but the official number was a million, I think, just this weekend. And it's so depressing to me that basic public health stuff is not that hard. If you understand just a little bit about epidemiology, airborne transmission, these kinds of things, it's not that hard. There are just a bunch of things that are glaringly obvious that we should be doing, and we're not doing fucking any of them. Or we did like a barely half-assed attempt at some of them and gave up prematurely. If if Even if we didn't have a vaccine, even if we had no effective treatments, you could very easily end a pandemic like this, and especially the earlier variants where they were not, their R0 was, I don't know, I think it was like 5 or 6. It was not good, it was a lot. Maybe it was even less than that for the first one. But it wasn't, like massive. That kind of level, if we would have just had everybody stay at home, pay people to stay at home for like 6 weeks, anytime somebody gets it, you do a lot of testing, monitoring. If somebody gets it, isolate them, pay again to isolate them. And then you wait, open things up a little bit, use masks for a while at least, do a lot of testing, and have contact tracing, which should just be built into our phones. And in fact, annoyingly, it is kind of built into our phones. We just don't use it because people are paranoid about privacy, which is just perplexing because the NSA has so much surveillance capability, and whether or not you have this thing that helps you detect whether you were exposed to something, that's no factor for the NSA. It's not like you're stopping them from surveilling you by not having that. So we're losing the good parts of that sort of thing. And that can be, a good contact tracing system is totally anonymous. So you don't even need to know who it was. You just need to know you were in close proximity, close contact with somebody who tested positive. And now the thing to do is, of course, you get paid to isolate, and you isolate for like 2 weeks. And or not even necessarily 2 weeks, you isolate for a few days, get a PCR test. If you're negative, you can go out. If you're positive, then you isolate for a little while until you get a negative PCR test. And in this process, doing that kind of stuff, again, even without a vaccine and even without effective treatments, you could slam the door on something like this easily, fucking easily. It's not even a question, and it's not like hypothetically, well, maybe we could try it and it might work. Absolutely would work. It's just a statistical certainty, essentially. And instead of that, what we did was kind of a half-ass, sort of shut stuff down, kind of, for a little while. Didn't really provide a lot of support. And then opened things up and didn't really have any kind of clear guidance. The CDC kept vacillating between masks and no masks, and it's like, masks aren't really necessary. Maybe you should do a mask. And it just was so fucking inconsistent. And people don't understand this stuff to begin with. They don't have a lot of patience for it. And when you have the experts sitting there saying no, and then yes, and then no, and then yes, and maybe, all that accomplishes is gets people to ignore you. It's not an effective strategy at all. So anyway, you do that, and once you have those vaccines, do the same stuff, but now vaccinate fucking everybody. And when I say fucking everybody, I don't mean like you're going over and like holding people down to vaccinate them, but really do everything you can to encourage everyone who can get vaccinated to get vaccinated. Make it easy for them and make it rewarding, because there should be fucking. I mean, again, this is one of these things where people freak out. Surveillance is like, oh, you can't have vax passports because it's like the mark of the beast or some complete insane bullshit. You know, having things like this lets us engage in society freely and know that A, that we're protected personally as much as possible, and B, that we're not going to kill somebody inadvertently because we're going to give somebody, we're not going to expose people who are immune compromised or vulnerable or just have bad luck to something that might kill them. The fact that that's something, I mean, yeah, there are so many fucking people. The ones that I'm really thinking of now are like Nate Silver, David Leonard, or whatever the fuck is. I don't even. He's in the category of people who I almost intentionally don't want to learn his name because I don't want to pay him the compliment of knowing his name. I wish I could unlearn how to say silver, practically. But you have all these people, Dr. Wen, and Dr. Gandhi, and an annoyingly large number of doctors. Really depressing. And all these people who are pushing just complete bullshit, often in the case of like Silver and Leonard, whatever the fuck, and actually all of the people that I just named, they're pushing like a return, urgency to normal. We got to get back to normal. We got to take off the masks and all this bull. And I don't know, the thing that annoys me is it's like, I don't like the fucking mask. I don't want to wear the fucking mask. I would like to have things be relatively normal. But the problem is that, you know, there's a certain amount of work that it takes to get to where you could do that. And instead, they're just skipping all of the hard work. And it's not even that hard. The annoying thing, the thing that makes me want to fucking pull my hair out of my head, is that it's not even that hard. It wouldn't take that long. It wouldn't take that much money. It would have taken far less time and far less money than we put into this shit to do an actual supported lockdown, to do contact tracing, to do regular testing, and to get the system set up where we could do regular testing and do it. I mean, it should be free to every person. Just you get tests, and I don't mean like you get 4 tests one time, maybe after a while, per household, by the way. In case your household has 5 people, it's great. I mean, you actually just get regular, and frankly, they should just be regular RT-PCR or cDNA or whatever the fuck variant you want to use. Something that is extremely sensitive, and it should be free to you, stupidly easy, and just automatic. Like once a week, you get a swab or you spit or whatever the fuck you're gonna do. You get tested, scan your phone app, and then you go about your life. And you just go about, and at a certain point you do this, and literally like you're just going about your life. You're not even wearing a mask. And as long as you're not exposed to anybody, that's fine. And if you are exposed to somebody or you test positive, then you isolate. And the people that are exposed isolate. It contains everything, and you don't have over 1 million Americans dying. It's just frustrating. And you also stop the thing in its fucking tracks, where right now we have so many countries that have almost nobody vaccinated. You have so many people here refusing to vaccinate, refusing to take even the barest of precautions. You have people like Nate Silver and Leonard talking about how it's some kind of like a leftist plot to manipulate government to get some kind of control. To have like just basic fucking public health is not a leftist plot. It's just, and having government do like the barest minimum shit to take care of people and to prevent 1 million people from dying in this country and even more globally. It's frustrating. Yeah, it's not like, it shouldn't be, the fact that this is even politicized is depressing as fuck. So anyway, what I wanted to get to, on a much more cheerful note, was listening to Hardcore History and I've said this one many times, but in listening to that, I noticed a couple of times uh, that what would come up is basically you have some new weapon system, some new approach to warfare. And that could be mechanized warfare, machine guns, tanks, all this kind of stuff. And the people before that stuff got employed, and people, not just random people, but like generals who kind of thought about war and theorized about this stuff, and they thought about how these things would be used kind of seriously. And they were not completely ignorant. They knew a bunch of history of this stuff. They thought essentially you would have these weapons and they would just transform war in such a way that battles would be over, wars would be over overnight. You would have things happen so fast and then it would just be done. And they actually thought, and anytime there are people who are generals strategizing about this stuff and saying, well, it's actually much more humane to have this much more lethal weapon because it's going to end things so much sooner and then fewer people will die. It's like, what actually happened? You have World War One, and actually before World War One, I guess there was a little bit of a trial run of this, kind of in Spain and a couple of other places. But World War One especially, you get trench warfare, things, the lines just freeze, and you have squishy people with mushy insides going up against a hailstorm of bullets flying at them and just getting chopped up. You have chemical weapons, which are very naturally dripping down into those trenches that people are trying to hide in. So you have mustard gas, chlorine, things that are not really good for you, and things that are actually much more friendly than what we would do now if we had that kind of stuff, but still horrible. And you had a bunch of people dying from that, and you just end up with like this long, protracted war of attrition that kills ridiculous amounts of people compared to. It's interesting if you look at a lot of sort of prehistoric societies and earlier societies, they would have wars that, it's not to say that they were bloodless by any means, but they would have small skirmishes which were kind of like dog fights, where obviously dog fights, like dogs will die sometimes, so they can be serious. People will stick their hand in there and get a finger chopped off. But a lot of dog fights, you have a thing where there's kind of a challenge, and then one of them is like, "Rrr, rrr," and they just growl at each other and maybe toss around a little bit. And then they sort of decide, okay, you're the winner, and we're just gonna, yeah. A lot of these things would be like that to some extent. I'm not, and I always want to very cautiously say, not better. There were a lot of things that were really shitty about that time. I'm not trying to say it was better, but the number of people that would die was not that great. And even when you start getting like, when you start getting more organized, you start having wars that are semi-professional armies and getting a little bit further, they would still be very small relative numbers of people. And even when lots of people would die, it was lots of people in a few battles or over a little bit of time, but it pretty much, I'm generalizing here because obviously there are exceptions, but it wasn't like massive numbers of people dying and getting injured. And then these weapons come up that are supposed to end things overnight and be so horrific that maybe even people wouldn't want to use them. And people use them, and the war goes on forever, and millions of people die. Like, just getting mowed down. And there's not even a advance in the territory. The things are just kind of static. And so you look at that, and then that's over. And then World War II comes along. And we have aviation sort of spun up a little bit before this, but it's really coming into its own a little bit. Not fully developed, but getting to be a thing. And before this, people are thinking, okay, well, we've got air power. Now, if you can drop bombs on cities, you don't even have to have a battle. You can just like fly over the city, drop the bombs, and then the battle will be over overnight, and the war would be over almost overnight. And of course, again, the same kind of generals are sitting there going, oh, it'll actually, even though these are much more horrific weapons and they're able to kill more people faster, the net number of people who die will be smaller because it's going to be so fast that, you know, it just won't go on that. And of course, you cut to the reality, and instead of this, you get fire bombings and things where, I mean, especially like once people learn how to make a firestorm, not that you can totally decide to do that, but get the right conditions and do the right things in the right kind of area, and you get these crazy winds, and you get fire that is sort of self-perpetuating itself by creating a firestorm, essentially. Getting a ton of oxidizer in, burning the shit out of everything, melting the streets, and really, I mean, some just unbelievably horrific shit. And this went on again in the same kind of like long, protracted war of attrition. And you notice a pattern here. And then for the bulk of the Cold War, you have people thinking, okay, we have, I mean, it was even essentially an official policy, mutually assured destruction. We have so many of these weapons that are so horrific that even if you tried to do a first strike, we have a retaliatory capability, which means that you do your first strike and you might kill all of us, but we will also kill all of you, and it'll be over instantly. Now, in this case, nobody's sitting there saying, well, okay, it's going to be over overnight, so it's not going to kill that many people. They learned their lesson, maybe, and they're like, okay, it will essentially, decimate only means take out 1/10 of the population. It would essentially reduce the population probably by more than an order of magnitude. I mean, I guess it depends on where things are and how long things last and all of this, but it would be cataclysmic and have lots of really horrible long-reaching implications. But the actual war, the thought would be over very quickly. And especially, it's an interesting thing. If you look at the history of how you go from like the Trinity device to Fat Man and Little Boy, deployment of that, and then you start playing with optimizing things, because the original Fat Man was a giant fucking sphere and used so much mass of plutonium, and it was a really complicated big thing. And you could put it in a big plane, but it would be an effort. They start optimizing this stuff, they start increasing the yield, and then they get to thermonuclear weapons and accidentally discover, oh, if you use the right lithium, you use didn't do it on purpose, but it's actually fertile and produces a bunch of the fuel for fusion, and the yield is much, much bigger than you expect. You start doing and then you start doing some other stuff, and now you've got these weapons that I guess the extreme culmination of that is like the Tsar Bomba, which it was designed to be 100 megatons, which it's like a billionaire. It's such a big number. You can't really and it sounds like 100 megatons, 100 kilotons. Doesn't sound like that much difference, right? $100 million versus $100 billion doesn't sound like that much difference, but it's massive amount of difference. And again, like almost an inconceivable range there. Now, it turned out the 100 megatons, they did the calculations, and it was like, you know, if we drop this thing, there's like no chance in hell that the people that dropped it are going to make it, because the blast radius and the effects of that are going to take down the plane. So they dial it back to 50 megatons, which is still a fucking crazy amount. And then drop it and essentially just flatten an island. Just like, and not only flatten an island, but you look at the range of how far you could be from that blast and still be killed instantly, and still be killed by radiation, and still be killed by the overpressure or whatever. It's insane, just fucking insane. The plane almost didn't make it, even with the cutting the yield in half. And it turns out actually that going big, weird thing about fusion is that you can start making these almost arbitrarily big. You could make a gigaton weapon if you wanted to. It's just not practical. And it turns out the optimal, like if you're a general kind of war strategist and you want to figure out how to kill as many people or take out as much stuff as possible, one of these big things is not nearly as useful from that perspective and the sort of bean counter of war thought process, where people are just numbers. It's not as useful as lots of smaller ones. And at a certain point, the yields kind of started coming down. Like we developed these compact, really impressive, depressingly, like clever engineering going into these things, where you'd have something that would be able to, if you look at, again, like Fat Man, we do compression, but to do compression on that with this explosive lens and all of this kind of stuff, they had to get this super precise timing in all these little places for these igniters and detonate everything just so, and then it would make this shockwave, and they had to set it up so that they had different speeds of explosive, and it made this implosion that would compress the core and reach a supercritical mass. And the modern stuff, they have these 2-point things. They have this geometry where they both have to go within very precise timing, which is not, for technology today, not that big of a deal. It was like pushing the limits of what could be done for Trinity, but now it's like not a factor. And if you don't do these in sequence at exactly the same time, then it will fizzle out. So it's a little bit of a protection in there, safety, so that it's not probably going to go off by accident. But they're so compact, and the explosive lenses are designed so well. And also, I mean, first off, you have the fission portion, which is, again, this thing compresses the core, and this, it's depressing how the physics behind it and the engineering is almost beautiful, and then the end result of that is horrifically awful. And it's just this juxtaposition of, you could understand how somebody not thinking about what they were doing might get enamored with figuring out how to do this stuff and how to solve these problems. And then at the end of the day, you have these weapons where one of them can end a city. And not like some tiny town or village, but just like flatten a city. And it's just, in World War II, we could flatten cities too, but it would take massive squadrons of stuff being dropped, and it would take being at the right conditions, and the city would have to be made out of the right kind of materials and have the right sort of alignment to the prevailing winds and all these kinds of things. And now it would just be like, bye-bye. It's again, horrifically awful. You have also, I mean, the whole history of ballistic missiles, going all the way back to sort of like the V2 era. And then you start getting intercontinental, and then you start getting multiple warheads. So you have these things that have these, again, really well designed death weapons, mass death weapons, set up in one of these things, and they're arranged in a nice little pattern. They get up to orbital space or suborbital space, pop the thing out, send these things on their way, and then when you're on the ground, you see a little shooting star. Actually, you see several shooting stars coming over here and here and here. And then pretty quickly thereafter, these things are traveling at high Mach, and yeah, just it's just horrifically awful. And it's also, I mean, you think about at the same time, from the perspective of somebody who, and you have to put yourself in the mind of somebody who is essentially a sociopath. Like, this is somebody who looks at people not really as human beings, but kind of like non-playable characters. They're just numbers in a computer someplace. They don't really matter or have any kind of life of their own or any real meaning beyond just numbers. And so you think about that, and they're like, oh, I would really like to take out this city. And without thinking like all of the implications of that, like destroying all the history, destroying all the people, the lives that are ruined, the damage that will be caused, and especially, you know, with fallout and other things, it's not just the damage that's caused immediately, but there's secondary stuff as well. But from their perspective, you're like, okay, I could deploy all these troops and all this equipment and get all this stuff over here, and I can do this much damage. And you know, you think about it, the way that they're doing it is, I used the word bean counter before, but it's so the same kind of thing, the same kind of math that makes you decide, okay, we could recall the Ford Pinto and fix this problem that we know they have, or, and just hear me out, if we just wait and then get sued in times and then do the settlements for those lawsuits, that, mind you, that those lawsuits are like killing families. It's not like, you know, oh, it's just a little bump. It's the car is fucking exploding. People are getting killed and permanently injured terribly. So do the lawsuits, do the settlements, and it's going to cost this much versus actually doing the recall. It's going to cost this much. And it's going to cost much more to do the recall and save people than it would cost to get sued and settle. So this is how fucked up these people are. They decide, like, okay, well, no fucking brainer. Let's just get sued and settle. Yeah, piece of cake. Wipe their hands of it, and they're just going on with their lives because all they give a shit about is money at the end of the day. And this is decades and decades ago. This is not contemporary, where I think this has gone from where that was to, like, at the time that was so beyond the pale, you could almost not even imagine it. And today, I don't even know if that would move the needle for people, because the standard today is so awful that it's like, that's just no big deal. Who cares? They're like, oh, we're running a pharmaceutical company. There are a lot of people who really need the drugs that we make, because if they don't take their insulin, they're going to go blind, or they're going to go get some limbs cut off, or they're going to die. So we can just start ratcheting up the price and increasing our profit margin. And then we can give ourselves multi-million-dollar bonuses, and our stock price will go up, and our shareholders will be happy, and all this stuff. At the cost of human lives. I'm just at a fucking loss for words. This is so horrible. So anyway, and again, the human lives don't. The only way the human lives even enter the equation for them is if those lives somehow come with a price tag. Because if they're just a negative externality and they're like, oh, well, some people are going to die, we don't care because we're just going to make money. We just need to make as much money as possible. Gotta maximize that next quarter profit. It's just it's demented. It's just fucking evil, is what it is. And these are the kinds of people who think about how to maximize, They think about war like they're playing a table game. Again, without thinking about the human costs, and not just human costs, but I mean, even if humans were like, if somebody gets killed on the battlefield, they just respawn someplace else. Imagine that. You live in a world where, and we have advanced medicine where any injury that doesn't kill you can be just repaired. No problem, you're good as new. Imagine you live in that world. There's no human cost. There's still a massive cost to just destroying artifacts, destroying cities which have to be rebuilt, destroying all the infrastructure. And then you get rid of that cost too. Imagine you can just do that stuff. And now you have secondary effects because all of these weapons, I mean, if it's a cluster bomb, you have unexploded ordnance, or mines, which will end up killing people, and worse than killing people, it'll end up taking off arms, blinding people, doing like little things like that, potentially for years into the future. All of these weapons are pretty toxic, so you're putting a bunch of bad chemicals into the environment, so there's going to be negative costs for a long time just from conventional weapons and just from like the non-awful stuff. Non-awful by the standards of like it's still killing and maiming people. And now you get into nuclear weapons. And interestingly, if you're doing stuff at the real extreme end, like the Tsar Bomba, there, so much of that explosion is fusion that it essentially takes the fission core that started it, and the neutron radiation just essentially fissions everything away. You get some highly radioactive stuff, but pretty quickly, stuff with short half-lives, those things will kind of decay away. And it's not, I don't want to say that it's clean, but it's not nearly as bad as it could be. Clean by the standards of nuclear weapons. Then you get the stuff that people would actually use, which are much lower yield, and in the worst cases, things like something that Russia has a lot of, fission, fusion, fission kind of stuff, which goes and it uses fission to trigger a fusion explosion, which then produces a shit ton of neutrons, and you use that to trigger more fission, which gives you increased yield. And that kind of stuff has lots of really long-lived radioactive waste, fallout. And that kind of stuff, you don't have to get that bad to like any of these things. You have these, you have highly radioactive stuff that will potentially kill people quickly, but that stuff sort of is so radioactive that it breaks down. It doesn't become that much of a factor for a while, or after a while. Now, of course, I'm ignoring like if there's cobalt and you end up with massive gamma ray things that last for many, many years thereafter and can produce very easily lethal radiation. Ignoring that kind of stuff, this low level stuff, like alpha emitters, like uranium and plutonium, things that are in these bombs, and that it's not like you ignite these things and all the uranium or all the plutonium in them just fissions away. A lot of it doesn't. And a lot of it partially, it decomposes a little bit, goes a few steps down the chain, and it produces other radioactive stuff. And a lot of these things will not necessarily kill you right away, but they'll get in your lungs, they'll get in your eyes, in your mucosa, you'll eat them, they'll get in your digestive tract, and when they're inside of you, they're spewing out these often like alpha particles and beta particles, which are essentially helium nuclei and electrons. And they're pretty easily stopped by like a sheet of paper or a sheet of foil, but when they're in your lungs, they're just like hammering away at your cells. And you can probably guess, not really great for you. It can cause a lot of secondary, it can cause not necessarily radiation burns, although it can do that, but it can certainly cause cancers later on, and not probably a thing that you would like. I would assume. I would rather not. And all of this is also ignoring, like, even if they were completely clean, when you detonate these things, you're putting so much dust into the air too that especially if you had a large exchange, that all of that dust is in the air, and now it takes a long time to settle down, and while it's in the air, you're decreasing insulation, you're decreasing the amount of sun that hits the surface, and could significantly impact the climate. Now, the kind of fucked up people that we have, the Nate Silvers of the world, will actually write an article in the New York Times saying, well, you know, maybe nuclear war is actually good because a little nuclear winter will offset this horrible climate change thing we've got. It's like, this is like fucking demented. I don't know if these people are serious or if they just don't understand what the fuck they're talking about, but it's horrifically bad. It's just like, again, makes me want to pull my hair out. I guess it's a good thing I don't have any. So all of that is one way of looking at it. It's one way of looking at it. But what I wanted to talk about specifically is with Ukraine. And since, and Twitter is sort of a weird thing. It's in some ways like the bane of my existence, but also I can't quit it. I'm on Twitter, and someone was talking about the possibility of limited, like low yield nuclear weapons, and people are not as afraid to use those. And I was saying, yeah, like that's the fucking problem. Because at least with me, yeah, don't get me wrong, mutually assured destruction has that destruction at the end. And when you look back through the history, I'm not even going to start scratching the surface on this one, but if you're not familiar with this stuff, look it up. There are so many cases in history where literally like one person on a submarine or one person in some monitoring station just was like, nah, we're not going to do this. And that saved the world. And when I say it saved the world, I mean this was in the sort of hair trigger, full-scale retaliation Cold War days, where if they would have launched, then we would have launched, the things would have passed each other, and then just fucked everything up beyond where it is now, by far. And we were like so close so many times. But the like sane people would say like, okay, what's not in the world? You would think, you would hope. And it worked. Almost didn't, but it ended up working. Now you have these low yield tactical things, which again, remember, the lower the yield actually makes these things more usable. The high yield stuff, it's complicated, but if you detonate it really close to the surface, then you actually end up creating a ton of fallout because you're irradiating everything on the surface, which activates it. And either you're throwing all these neutrons in there, and it gives you a lot of radioactive isotopes. And so you can take it, detonate it pretty high up, and the blast actually ends up killing more anyway, so it's an effective way to do more damage, which is again the calculus that these people are using. And so they do these airbursts at high yield. But if you really want to have something that's usable, like when it's something like that, I mean, again, like there's something I think called Nuke Map. If you Google it, you can find it. And that has just a map, and you can scroll it to your city or wherever. You can pick, pick just some standard, US or Russian or Chinese nuclear warhead and detonate it someplace. And you can see, okay, this is a 2 megaton airburst. And this is the blast radius where everybody's going to be killed instantly and just vaporized. This is the blast radius where everybody's going to be killed by the overpressure. And this is where people will be killed instantly by the radiation. And this is where people might be blinded, but they'll still live. And you kind of go out from there. You have the horrible, like, oh, the people that are going to lose their skin because it's like essentially being in a firestorm, and then they're blinded and they're just dying slowly. And this is where the people will be living, but exposed to fallout probably, and then dying, getting sick and dying. And yeah, you figure that out. And you do that and you put it over in Phoenix, say Sky Harbor. It's a nice kind of central place. And you look at how far out that goes, like it's horrifying how much damage that does. But the fact that it's horrifying also tempers people to some extent, keeps them from doing it. Now, it's interesting when you look at World War II, the amount of conventional ordnance people dropped. If they had the ability to say, like, okay, this one thing is the equivalent of all these other things, they would have gladly done it. And in fact, I guess the US did it twice. So, not a great situation. But people are hesitant. But they're not that hesitant to use conventional weapons. So if you get down in yield to these things where they're really small, but like a really big conventional weapon or a little bit bigger, and especially also they can be launched from a great distance away, so you don't have to put a bunch of stuff in the field. You don't have to launch massive bombers. You can just have it on a cruise missile or use an ICBM and just bing, 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 and hit your targets. And yeah, that's very tempting. I mean, if you look again at the history of Korea, the Korean War, Korean conflict, a lot of generals wanted to nuke the shit out of Korea. Like they wanted to do it. Didn't do it, luckily. And we've maintained, since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we have maintained this thing, well, somehow, that's the no first use taboo. Nobody, with that exception, has ever been the first person to do any of this stuff. And what's scary, and I feel like it's scary both in the immediate future with Putin, but also in the long run, you think about, you have these weapons. The weapons are very tempting to a certain kind of person. And especially now, a lot of money, like the stockpile stewardship programs and modernization programs are spending something, I don't remember the number exactly, but it's into the trillions of dollars to modernize these things and get lower yield stuff. And the thing that's scary about that lower yield stuff is that it's much more tempting to use. And also, now we no longer have MAD, and you imagine, what scares me the most in this situation is whether it's Putin or somebody else, somebody finally decides, okay, I am going to break the no first use taboo. I'm going to go and I'm in this battle, and especially like the thing that's scary about Ukraine is like, he's not doing well, and he's got a bunch of these things. It's like not that hard. This is a person who's poisoned a bunch of people. Not that hard to imagine him deciding like, fuck it, So you do that, and the thing that's scary, the thing that's actually, this is going to sound weird, but the thing that I find the most scary about this is that these low yield things, they do have fallout. They're not good. You don't want to be anywhere near them, and especially if they're not airbursts. If they're near the ground, any material that gets irradiated, you're probably going to have some really bad stuff being produced by that. But that being said, it's not going to be nearly as bad as like the end of the world. And so what happens, at least as I see it, is somebody does that once. And now the seal is broken. It's like, okay, we've done it. And you look and it's like, well, that wasn't actually that bad. We've done a bunch of testing and we're still here. All of us literally all of us, unless you're old enough. Well, I guess if you're old enough, then you still absorbed it through your diet. But all of us now have in our bones isotopes that were created in these air bursts, these tests. Um, so it definitely doesn't stay in one place, but we're also still here. You know, that didn't even the people who were in like downwind of fallout in really bad cases. Um, some people die, but a lot of people don't. And even if they do die, like or they have increased risk of cancer or other diseases, there's a pretty long time horizon on that. It's not like it's not like you get a little bit of fallout on you and then you just croak. It's not VX. It's not some kind of nerve agent. It's increasing your statistical risk for dying in certain ways over a long period of time. And the thing that's scary about that is actually that it doesn't, I mean, if you don't want to be in the immediate zone, but if somebody drops one of these and just uses them in a conventional way, conventional air quotes, it's like, oh, and now other people are like, oh, well, shit, we could just do this too. And the thing that's unnerving there is now you start having the prospect of sort of a protracted nuclear war, a limited, in air quotes, nuclear war. And that scares the shit out of me because that, unlike it, MAD is horrible, nuclear holocaust, horrible, but it's horrible enough that it discourages people from doing it. This is horrible, but it's horrible in a way that is on par with the stuff that we're already doing. And people, once the seal is broken, there's no real limit to, it's not like there's some magical, okay, now you're using nuclear weapons, but you're only going to stay, there's the new taboo, which is you stay under 2 kilotons, or some yield limit, just completely arbitrarily set. There's no reason to do that. Once that seal is broken, there's almost an inevitable ratcheting up of yield, up to whatever works, or whatever people are interested in. And you could imagine being in a scenario where that thing that I talked about, where you have MIRVs coming in, and you see you're in a city, and you're just going about your life, and just like the air raid sirens in London, it's like, oh, well now the V2s are coming in, so you're there and you see a couple of shooting stars, probably go to the bomb shelter, and you come out and there are just big chunks of your city missing. And you could imagine, I mean, not necessarily here, although you don't know, but in different places, that could be a fact of life, just like war is and has been. I mean, I don't think there's been any time in my lifetime, certainly, where that hasn't existed someplace. And now it's just that, but ratcheted up. And once they start ratcheting it up, so many people have access to these increasingly higher yield things that, again, they might not go, well, we need a Tsar Bomba, but they might go, a couple hundred megatons. I did not mean that. A couple hundred, no, actually I did mean that. A couple hundred megatons. They might go, we'll do that. And you just keep ratcheting up. And the only real limit there, practically, is just, at a certain point, it's much more efficient in terms of killing people and destroying stuff to limit your yield. So it's not even that people are being sort of chastened or tempered by some kind of not wanting to destroy everything. It's that they're just not using the maximum yield possible because it's just not very effective at doing the horrible thing that they're trying to do. And so this is anyway why I worry a lot about this. And it's one reason why I think, and again, like I don't know what the geopolitical situation will be in 50 years or 200 years. But I do think, I fear really, that whatever happens now, whatever happens in the next 5 years, like this could happen tomorrow, mind you, but it could also not happen for a while. And at a certain point, as long as this stuff is in the stockpile, as long as we've got it and we're ready to use it, at some point, almost inevitably, somebody will use it. It's just a metastable state, and it's got to have some kind of a mean life. I don't know what that mean life is, but it's not infinite. I guarantee that. And so you think about it as like, okay, at some point, and it could be 50 years, it could be 200 years, I'd worry that it's on the shorter end. I mean, you think about like this country has only been here for like 250 years. And well, you know what I mean, as such. And 250 years ago, things were very different, right? Could you imagine 250 years from now being absolutely certain that at no time between now and then somebody would finally decide like, fuck it? And especially like people, there's some, I mean, it's horrible when wars happen, but there is something about that being in living memory that kind of keeps people from doing it again, or at least makes them think twice about it. Because when you have Holocaust survivors and you have people who were veterans in World War II, and they're like, oh shit, this is what a war is like. You know, it's not like some fucking video game. That keeps people from doing shit to some extent. Although obviously, like, a lot of generals from World War II were still there for Vietnam and Korea, and or people who were at a lower rank then were kind of running things later. And so, you know, they still did it. Still did this stuff. It's depressing. The history of civilization just makes me think it's very unlikely that people would not do that. And I also think, I mean, it's kind of a similarly horrible thing. I don't know that people would voluntarily put down their arms. I mean, they might like reduce them to where you can only wipe out the world in times. But at a certain point, like to say totally disarm, I don't see people doing it. At least not anytime soon. I mean, and especially when you look at the situation politically and how, and the only like small amount of hope I have there is just that on the time scale of like 30 years, 30, 50 years, things can change a lot. At some point in the past, the Republicans actually cared about the environment. Fucking Nixon started the EPA. You know, you think about that, and it's like, that was what, like 50 years ago or something, order of, and now they're just like they're pouring oil on baby seals. I can't remember who was saying that, but it was somebody said that yesterday. Or I listened to somebody saying that yesterday, and it's basically true. Like they're almost like fuck the environment. They have trucks that are just designed to spew out black smoke and do the worst damage that they possibly can, as though they're not living in our environment, as though we're not all dependent on breathing the air and drinking the water and eating the food that grows in our environment. It's such a fucking nightmare where we are. I do hope that changes, and I hope it changes for the better before we do something terrible. And I don't know. I worry though. I don't know what the outcome will be there, but I definitely know that the risks are pretty considerable, and it's not something that I think people really appreciate in terms of just how like serious and dangerous these things are. And especially, I think people don't understand or appreciate how the only thing holding this stuff back is this kind of imaginary no first use taboo. And all it takes is one person to pierce that one time, and then it's just obliviated. And obviate. I don't even have the right word. It's just gone. And now people have that stuff on the menu. And what will they do with it? Probably not anything good, I would assume. So with that, this is the last thing that I want to say. I don't want to end quite there because it's really depressing. I love Star Trek. Well, I like a lot of things about it. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but I like a lot of things about it. And the thing that I like the most about it is it presents this future, and especially like the Next Generation and the original series to a lesser extent, a little bit Deep Space Nine. It presents this future where people are essentially in a post-scarcity environment. They're in a situation where all of the major problems that we have sort of been dealt with. It's not like everything, there are certain problems that are genuinely hard, but most of the problems that we have today are of our own devising, and they're things that could be fixed. And they've done it. They've managed to pull it together. Now, granted, they had the Bell riots in 2024, which, getting closer to 2024, it seems eerily prescient. When you look at, I mean, that Deep Space Nine was in the mid 90s, and they predicted this thing in 2024. You go to San Francisco or LA now, and there are all these homeless encampments, and it's not that hard to imagine people putting homeless people in like a little kind of enclosed space and just let them fend for themselves in this kind of Mad Max world, because we don't want to see it, right? You just want to have that, don't actually want to solve the problem, you just don't want to see it, don't want to be bummed out. Fucking does not really merit well for your civilization when you think that way. To be, you know, I'm not saying I'm keeping score here, but when you're sitting here and you're looking like you're, so you just you have all of these houses that are empty. You have so much food that just rots every year. Plenty to feed everybody if you wanted to. You have all these resources, all this wealth, and instead of actually applying that and making people's lives better, you just want to shovel them off and, you know, wall them up over here, not even look at them. Yeah, it's great. Doing fucking fantastic. So, yeah, but you look at that and it seems prescient. They had a nuclear war in Star Trek Future, which is depressing because it doesn't seem, I'm not saying it's going to happen, and I really want it not to happen, but it's also something where it's like, it seems very much more likely than I would like at some point, and it's horrible. It's like, it's terrible also that we have all of these ideas of like dystopian futures where aliens who completely bypass like the Oort cloud and the gas giants, where they have all this fuel and material, and for some reason come to Earth where they're gonna take up the water despite it being in a big fucking gravity well and the place being occupied. It's like not really sensible. The real enemy here, the real threat to our future existence, is not coming from up there probably. It's just us. It's us doing stupid shit. And it would be nice if people didn't do stupid shit. You know, that's all I'm asking. It's just like, be fucking better. Don't do stupid shit. If you have the resources, I mean, here's the thing that kills me. Like, I'm not like hyper anti-capitalist, but you look at the current situation where it's stupidly wealthy people making drugs for very little that save lives and do a lot of things that were developed with taxpayer funding, which is drying up now because that's not a great investment, and we got to run the country like a business because fuck knows why. But these people are making these things and they're selling them for a massive profit. And they could be selling them at a price where people could afford them, and they could still be making a comfortable profit. And they're not. They have to make as much as humanly possible. They have to squeeze every drop of blood out of people. It's such a just pathology, such a disease. And it doesn't end well. it's not a good path to go down. Like I watch these Supreme Court hearings. I'm not, you know, watching from a distance and seeing like clips. I'm not sitting there through the whole excruciating questioning and all of this, which, I mean, I don't know how people who do this do that. And I do understand, like, go through the gauntlet of fire and then you have a lifetime appointment. It's something. But at the same time, I mean, it's just, you have to deal with these fucking idiots like Ted Cruz saying just stupid shit and stuff that, to me, it looks like obviously somebody in the future is going to look back at this stuff and they're going to see it like the, what was the guy's name? Segregation Today, Tomorrow, and Forever. Wallace, I think. I don't even know. Looks like a horrible person. Yeah. Doesn't play well in the future. That's what they're doing. And for why? Why are they doing it? Just because it it maximizes their profit with their constituency. And part of that is like this self-fulfilling thing, because if somebody would just fucking stand up and say, you know, like, this is wrong. Like, actually the Utah governor just vetoed anti-trans legislation, which is amazing and I appreciate it. But it's like, you've gone too far for the Republican governor of Utah. You're bring it back into fucking check, people. Just, you know, it's just like, we don't need to go down this path, and this path does not go to a good place. I would like to go to a better place. I would love to go to something like, maybe it's not like a Star Trek future, but maybe it's something where we actually distribute resources more equitably. And maybe it's someplace where we have, yeah, we're not like fucking people over as much as possible. And maybe it's someplace where instead of like squeezing every drop out of people, you're helping people, and maybe they're giving you a little bit of extra resources because they appreciate what you're doing. And it's like, you know, you're giving a good deal. You're developing something, you're making something for them. They're like, hey, yeah, it costs you this much to make it. I want to give you this much, and it's a little bit more, and you can do what you will with it. Instead of, you need this or you're going to die. Well, here, how much, you know, what does it cost? Well, what do you got? Yeah, I mean, that's the situation we're in now. The world is what we make it. You know, it's our choice. It could be a heaven or it could be a hell. It can be any place in between. It can be fair. It can be unjust. And it's our choice. It is as it is, not because there's some divine being out there just dictating it. It's not some inevitable conclusion of humanity that it has to be like this. This is what we've chosen to make. We can change our fucking minds, you know? You can go down a path and then realize that that path is really dumb and really awful. And you can say like, hey, maybe it's not some crazy leftist conspiracy to actually have good public health measures. Maybe it's not some crazy leftist conspiracy to think that you could have, I don't know, healthcare that doesn't suck. Maybe we shouldn't be extracting all the fucking oil we can and all the natural gas and letting that stuff into the air and burning it, or just letting the methane into the air and getting way more bang for our buck in terms of greenhouse gases. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we shouldn't have fucking wars. That, you know, maybe, and also maybe you have those nuclear weapons. Maybe don't use them. Maybe don't. Maybe just don't. Why? Like, you know, I know you want to see the fireworks. You've got your toys, and you're desperately like, oh, I can't. I've just, yeah. I mean, it's almost the same thinking of the people that talk about like blue balls. They're like, oh, I've got this nuke wood and I've gotta use it or else I'm gonna go. It's like, no, you don't have to use it. It's very bad. If you want to see it, there are plenty of videos. You can do simulations. It's not that great. There's another thing that I just don't understand with people. When I was a kid, I liked fireworks a little bit. And then I kind of grew out of it because it's like once you've seen it a little bit, you're like, okay, yeah, that's what that is. Um, there are people that seem to just be able to enjoy that shit forever. And at a certain point, you're like, are you dumb? Like, what is wrong with you? It's not it's not that good. It's not that new. There's no novelty to it too. It's like, okay, you've seen how many we're gonna blow it up real good. Like how many times can you see stuff get blown up real good? How many times can you see people with their guts hanging out or their skin burned off or they're dying of radiation poisoning? You don't need it. You don't need to do that. You don't need to go through the exercise and then say like, okay, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. You don't need to make the mistake and learn from it. You could probably, in fact, we'd all be better off if you didn't do that and just avoided it. So please just avoid it. That's all I'm asking. It's a nice place. I've got all my stuff here. I'd like to not have the planet ruined. It's just nice. I mean, to be fair, ruined is a relative term. Ruined for me in the short term, ruined for humanity. The planet probably will be fine, at least in some time scale. But, although there is a clock ticking, we only have like 1 billion years left, unless we do some star lifting. But yeah, that's some time. You can enjoy it while we're here and maybe make it last a lot longer instead of trying to race to fuck everybody over. Well, with that, this lasted a little longer than I was expecting. I could keep talking about this, but I think I've talked enough about it. Yeah, I'm going to give that was not the one that I was going to do. I threw up the Vulcan thing. I was trying to do the peace sign and I don't even know. Oh, there it is. There it is. Which is weirdly the victory sign as well. It's a strange thing. But, live long and prosper. What is the other one? It's, I can't remember. They have live long and prosper, and then they have peace and long life, Let's not fuck the place up, please. And I don't even have, this is the thing that gets me too. I don't even have kids. It's a lot of these generals, a lot of these people who are interested in doing this stuff have kids. Like, why would you? I already don't want to fuck the place up, and I have no massive personal stake in the future at the moment. Why, if you do, would you want to do it? It's just crazy. Don't do that. Please. Be better. Be better. Don't, and also, like, at the same time, don't be fucking Ted Cruz. I mean, I know you're his wife and you gotta fuck him, but no, I mean, don't be this guy. Just don't do that. Don't be the person. Don't be George Wallace. Don't be the person who's sitting there making a video that somebody's going to be looking back at in 50 years thinking, Jesus, fuck, what a racist. What an asshole this guy was. He's, I mean, you look at it and it's just like, this may seem cool right now, I guess, but it's not going to look very good to your children or your children's children at some point. As bad as certain things are now, I think I can pretty safely say that. Anyway, with that, thank you, and Zaijian.